Nathan, one of the keywords that I tuned into in your previous answer there was digestible. And when you're presenting this content to the principal or to the client, and I'd be curious to hear more about how you present this information and what tips you have to actually get clients to understand what you're trying to convey to them, and then maybe and adhere to that, because that's always the tricky part in this business. It's
Mm.
one thing to have the best assessment, but then to actually get the principal to apply what you're saying or understand what you're saying. So I'd be curious to hear what tips you have for that.
Yeah, and that really depends on kind of the profile, not just the profile of the traveler itself, but who you're dealing with. If you're dealing with the executive protection type of a format, you might be able to brief the principal, but probably not. You're going to be briefing the executive assistant or the support team or someone else, and you might get 5 minutes with the principal. So you've got to use that time very quickly, wisely, right, to let them know what's happening and what the context is when they arrive, what that looks like. So our approach is typically, if it's someone that's newer to international travel, let's say they just graduated a graduate program and they're launching with an NGO to, you know, somewhere, MENA region, Africa, South America, that might be a moderate risk or above location that we would deem. Um, we're fairly comprehensive in how we do that travel briefing because probably they've never received a real travel briefing before, right? So we will, it will be a little bit longer. It's probably be about an hour long. Um, and we'll go through kind of best practices for travel. We'll go through like the context, the security context for the country. We'll talk about culture, right? And they'll probably know these things, but we'll hone in on what's important to them. And then we'll go into response actions, like if something were to happen, if something adverse were to happen, what are your responses for communication, for safety incident, for security, for medical, right? And then we go through that process. Then we give them a short one-pager sheet so they've got kind of a digestible takeaway that they can take a look at later. That's really honed in and slimmed down. And that approach is fairly comprehensive. But we wouldn't use that for someone who's well seasoned and returning to the same country maybe multiple times or done a lot of international travel, and it's fairly salty and has a lot of dust in their boots for a lot of these locations. So because you don't really, you're not going to gain their attention, you're not going to hold it for sure. So we've got to hone in on for that type of a risk profile, or sorry, for that type of traveler profile. We're going to talk about what they're doing, activities, right? We're going to focus in on that. We'll talk about like current events as it relates to what they're trying to accomplish. So it really requires that soft skills to understand and read the individual, right, and understand kind of where they are, and kind of tailor it to their purpose. Our format doesn't change, but how the conversation goes during those travel briefings and the preparation part, yeah, that definitely has to be flexible because people are not machines, they're not robots. So one approach will not work for everyone.
Gotcha. I'd be kind of curious if there was ever a time when you were learning these kind of soft skills and presenting this information to clients where maybe at the start of your career where you kind of missed the mark a bit or had to learn these lessons the hard way, where like you're presenting information in a too complex matter or something like that, or if going into too many details versus someone who wanted just the bigger picture, or
Yeah.
I'd be curious if you've ever had an experience like that.
Sure. Yeah, I think anyone who's done like a travel briefing or those travel risk management has had that happen, right? Um, and I think the key takeaway from that, for me anyway, was to ask questions, to not assume, because maybe you get a profile like this individual, you've got an age, you got where they're going, you might even have their CV, but you don't really know the person because you've never had a conversation with them. So just asking a few key questions really kind of helps provide that level of understanding of about the individual and probably what they're looking for, and it opens up that dialogue. So it's not just they show up for something and they're maybe they're pretending to be in receive mode, but they've already checked out. And that's not a good, very productive session, obviously.
Interesting perspective there. So what I'd be curious to hear, like, what are the kind of key questions that you open up these sessions with, just to open up that dialogue during that process.
Yeah, primarily the one of the main questions I ask is, if you're going to this location, tell me about what you're planning on doing when you get there. Like, what do you have planned? Like, what's the airport pickup look like? We'll start with that. And probably I know it. We should know it, right? But if we don't, sometimes these things are being planned at the last minute. It's helpful to have that understanding, right? So when we get that information, we start that dialogue that way. They start providing information about where they're going, what they're planning on doing. And then that really kind of feeds into, honestly, a lot of the conversation goes into their professional background, like how the career, how they got involved with this. And sometimes it's quite fascinating. It's very interesting, honestly. We work with a lot of different organizations. It's always interesting to find how, like, it's a small world when people start traveling. So maybe they know someone that you had briefed 2 months ago, or they know someone from another organization. Um, so like those conversations kind of open into a little bit more of a relationship building practice as well, which is useful. So then you can start to get a little bit more trust developed, that you know what you're talking about as a professional, and you respect them as a professional on their end, as a subject matter expert or whatever they're doing while they're arriving and traveling and operating in that destination. So it's very helpful, I think. That's typically has been my approach.
Let's switch gears for a minute. I want you to talk to me as if I were